Everybody, can you guys hear me? And are you able to unmute?
Yep.
Yes.
I don't hear you.
Okay, great. How's everybody doing?
Good.
Yeah, has the labs coming along? You guys have had 2 of them so far, correct?
Absolutely
Yeah.
good.
Okay, so the end of last week, we talked about gaining access to the 8th edition PowerPoints that I've been lecturing off of. Jay told me that he sent them. Did you guys receive them?
Yes. Yes.
Oh, terrific. That was exactly
Yes.
what I wanted to know. Okay, and then he had mentioned something about, you were wondering about the quizzes that I've been doing at the beginning of each of the lectures, like I'll do tonight for lecture 2. You have those questions on the PowerPoints, but I made separate documents today, so Jay will be, I'm not sure how he'll distribute them, if he'll wait, each lecture, like he may release 1 and 2, and then wait for 3, 4, and 5. But I made separate documents for the 10 question quizzes for each lecture, and at the end are is the answer key, so that you know what the correct answer is. Okay, so but
Awesome.
Did you state that he released the videos?
What?
Or just the PowerPoint?
I know that he released the PowerPoints to you. He told me that the next morning, but the recordings, from what I understand, should be released. Did you guys receive the recording for 1 and 2?
No.
No.
I have not. No.
Okay, so then my guess is he'll share that with you. But in any event, you have the PowerPoint, and just like I'll do now for quiz 2, for the quiz for lecture 2, the PowerPoints, the second, what is it, second to there are 4 slides, I believe. So after the first, the opening slide, there's 4 slides that have the 10 questions. But he's going to send you a document for each of the lectures that have the questions again, but then with the answer key at the bottom. Okay.
Would you say that's the best way to study?
Well, it's not the only way. When I generated those questions, I went back to the publisher's resource when I was developing the curriculum for the 8th edition, and I went through their question bank and chose 10 questions, but this was out of, let's say, 100 questions. So is it the best? No, absolutely not. The best is that you immerse yourself not only in our lectures, when the recordings are released, the content on Canvas, reading the textbook. It's really all of that. Okay, the more that you can immerse yourself with the content and make it real. Okay, I talked about that last week. Apply it to the real world. The easier it's going to be that you're going to learn it instead of memorizing it. I'm sorry.
I just wanted to make a comment that the quizzes are in our notes. It looks like they.
Okay, yes, exactly.
You have the answers marked.
Yeah, the answers I don't think are marked in the students' notes. They're marked in the lecture notes for the instructor. So yes, but they are there as well. Okay, but Jay had reached out to me this morning stating that I guess you guys were mentioning that you wanted those quizzes. I guess the lab instructor must have relayed that message. Clearly you've had them already through the student notes, but they're also in the PowerPoints, and they have that, and then I think Jay's going to be sending you separately the quizzes in a separate document. Okay.
Could I get the student notes emailed to me again, or are they on Canvas?
If you have access to the 8th edition, but I would definitely, if it's already been sent to you, I would check, if you didn't receive them, check your junk, because I know he did send them. Even the gentleman who was telling me last week, or for the last 2 weeks, that he hasn't had access, they CC'd me on the email. So maybe his email is not correct based on what he sent, if he's had, but he didn't reply that he received it. So definitely check your junk, because WITS does a very good job at trying to get this information out. Okay, so just go back and check. But at any point that you don't have something that you need, contact the office, call them. You can email them, but if you don't hear from them, you can certainly call them. All right, but I would not wait on this. We're in week 3, and it's going very fast, guys. So
it is.
really need to have information. Okay.
Yeah. Can I ask you a question?
Sure.
I'm kind of confused on VO2 max and METs and what we need to know about it. If-
So I'll have to look back and see. I know that there's in the very first PowerPoint, there was a breakdown, and you should have gotten that on the student notes, I believe. It should be in that as well, or at least on Canvas. There's a breakdown on how much of that, but VO2 max, anybody want to help out and explain what VO2, what that stands for?
Maximum oxygen consumption.
Yeah, so it's a volume of oxygen, right? So unless you're testing using a treadmill or a bike and doing, I think we talked about, or you might have talked about this in the lab, a Bruce protocol. This is what they do when they do stress testing. We do what's called submax testing, but you gather data through heart rate, blood pressure, and basically their response at certain stages. And through formulas, you're able to determine someone's VO2 max, which then translates to METs, to metabolic equivalent, and
Okay.
then program based on that. So METs and VO2 are basically the same. It's just that you determine someone's VO2 and it's expressed in MET level. It'll give you a range of their MET level, or the VO2, the VO2 range, and then you can program based on heart rate. Right now, you guys, I think lab 2, right? You went through all the assessments. So the step test would be the assessment that you would use right now, because there's a correlation between heart rate, VO2, and METs. Okay, so you were able to, right? You did do the step test, correct? The 3-minute step test.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, the whole purpose of that test was to have the person sit after the 3 minutes and then take their heart rate to see how quickly they recover. But if you do want to take this to the next step, I would definitely recommend, ACSM, American College of Sports Medicine, has a certification exercise physiology where you can actually learn and be certified to do not only submax testing, but also to do stress testing, where you could work with a cardiologist, all right? But in terms of VO2 and METs, it's the same thing, it's just the way it's expressed, okay? So it's either,
Okay.
volume of oxygen per kilogram of body weight versus METs, okay? So they're the same, the same outcome, but they're expressed differently, if that makes sense.
Okay. So it's
Now-
not something we will have to really figure out when we're working with somebody.
That's why you should look at the retired questions. There may be some questions about, your ability to recognize what VO2 is or what METs are. I can't imagine that the exam would be, heavily weighted with that information. But that's why you should go back on Canvas and look at the retired questions, because those questions were once upon a time test questions, exam questions. All right, and then they were retired.
Right.
So
Now-
look at the test bank and see if there are, let's see how many questions are on that specific topic, and then you'll kind of have a ballpark idea of, what your knowledge should be on that information.
I keep
Okay.
seeing VO2 max explained, and it's saying mostly that you have to have specific equipment to test VO2 max.
Exactly, right.
Is there a formula that we can use in like real time training somebody to, what is that formula? Do you know?
Well, this is exactly what I'm talking about, is that we don't cover that in this course. So that's pretty much your guide to know that you're not going to be tested extensively. You will not be asked to do anything like that in the lab, on the lab, the practical. And your questions related to that information will be limited as well, because we don't really get into detail on that.
Okay,
Okay.
thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, what I want to move on to now is the quiz from lecture 2. I'll do the same format that I did for lecture 1. Just let me know. I'll advance the slides. Let me know when you're ready to move to the next slide. There's a total of 4 slides with 10 questions, and then we can discuss the answers.
Okay.
Okay, so here's question 1 through 3. Take your time and just let me know though when you're ready for me to move forward.
I'm good.
Okay.
One moment.
Okay, no worries.
Okay, I'm good.
Okay, great.
I'm good.
Should I wait or are we good, guys?
I'm good.
I'm good.
Okay.
I'm good.
Everybody
I'm
else
good.
okay? Okay. Last slide. Sorry, guys. Switch the slides here. Sorry about that.
I know I'm good on the questions.
Everybody all set?
Yeah, I'm good too.
Okay, great.
Mhm.
All right, let's go through the answers. Okay, so number one, which of the following is not one of the 4 bone classifications?
I'll go D.
Yeah, regular, correct, right? There's long, there's short, there's flat. Okay, but irregular, not regular, okay? Synarthrosal joints, which one, A, B, C, or D?
A.
Correct, no movement. Okay, it's the throttle that offer the most amount of movement. Okay, flexion and extension occur in the transverse plane, true or false?
False.
False, it'd be frontal plane, right?
Correct, right, because remember, the frontal plane cuts the body front to back, right? So what did we say was what's the other plane? What's the one that,
Sagittal.
Sagittal.
right, so what did we say was what would be an exercise that would move in that plane?
Adduction and adduction and abduction.
Nice job, nice job. Okay, so 4, when a muscle generates tension that is not great enough to cause movement, but instead slows the speed of movement in the opposite direction caused by another force, this is referred to as
Centric.
Concentric.
eccentric, right? So concentric is up, eccentric is down, right? So we're slowing down, because now we're fighting the weight of whatever's in our hand, okay? Whether, whatever the resistance is, in addition to gravity, okay? So that's the eccentric contraction of the muscle. Okay, 5, which of the following statements about stability is false?
D.
Correct. Okay, right. So the first 3, it is increased when the base of support is widened versus when our feet are together. It is directionally proportional to body weight. It is inversely proportional to the height of the center of gravity above the base of support, right? Because center of gravity can change, depending on what's going on. Okay, 6. The primary source of ATP, adenosine triphosphate, for a 100-meter dash is?
A.
Correct, right? Because short duration activities. Someone mentioned last week about ATP and, wondering if it was, a protein. So ATP is how we produce energy. It's within the cell, within the mitochondria. And when we're producing energy all day long, but depending upon our activity level, will determine whether we're doing that. So if we're using creatine phosphate, is that anaerobically produced or aerobically produced?
Anaerobic.
Correct, right? There was 2 systems that produce energy anaerobically without the presence of the oxygen, and it allows for quick bursts of energy. Anybody know the time frame? Anybody remember the time for duration?
Is it less than 2 minutes?
Exactly, roughly 30 seconds up to 2 minutes. Okay, after that, either you have to stop the activity or switch into the aerobic, so that, the aerobic method of producing ATP, so that now we're using oxygen as, to produce ATP. Nice job, guys. Okay, 7, which of the following fiber types would demonstrate a slow rate of contraction, low force production, and high fatigue resistance?
Type 1.
Correct, right? So if we're going, let's say we're doing a 100-meter dash, and just get off the line, and do we immediately go to our type 2X fibers without recruiting type 1 first?
No.
Correct, right? So it's a you start with the type 1s, and then depending on what it is that we're doing, it will recruit them in order. Okay, it doesn't jump or skip a fiber type. Okay, 8, during the transition from rest to steady state exercise, ATP demands must be met initially by the ATP-PC system and anaerobic glycolysis, since oxygen delivery to the cell cannot instantaneously increase. The lag in oxygen delivery is called
Oxygen deficit.
correct. Remember, we saw that graph, right? So we all know this because usually when we start aerobic activity, there's going to be a moment where our ventilatory rate, our breathing rate will increase for a period of time. But with training, that deficit, okay, improves, okay? And then we pay it back on the other end. But, you know, newbies will have a greater period where they may feel that sense of breathlessness because of that oxygen deficit, okay? Because the body's producing, you know, energy anaerobically until it can catch up with all of the increase in heart rate and blood pressure and breathing rate. Okay, that's why that all happens. Okay, 9. During exercise, the primary mechanism of heat loss is
Evaporation.
right.
Evaporation.
Yeah, exactly. So I think I might have mentioned last week, we can't change this. This is just how, you know, who we are. But we all know that there are people that just sweat profusely, and then there are people that the sweat will just kind of, you know, glisten on their skin, and then it's evaporated back into the body. So the person that's more prone for dehydration is that profuse sweater, but there's nothing you can do about that. Okay, so except drink lots of water if that's the type of sweater you are. Okay, D, during times of reduced training volume, which of the following is the most important training variable linked to the maintenance of VO2 max?
Intensity.
Intensity.
Right, just like heart rate, right? So it's based on the intensity, not so much the duration, the frequency, or the mode. Okay, although all those things are important when we're training, when putting a program together, but it's really the intensity that drives all of that. All right, nice job, guys. Any questions on any of that?
No.
Okay, great. It sounds like you guys have been doing your work. That makes me happy. So tonight we're focusing on 5 and 20, nutrition and weight management. So as promised, it's not as intense as last week's lecture, and that goes on for lecture 4 and 5. Last week was probably in my opinion, the more difficult one, and I think you guys probably agree with that. So, all right. So, and you know, the nice thing about this lecture is you probably know a lot of this stuff already. Okay. So, essential nutrients, we have carbohydrates, fats, proteins, vitamins, minerals, and water. Okay. So, which of these directly provide energy? If you had to answer that question.
Carbs.
Correct. Yeah. I mean, we're probably drawing energy from, you know, the first 3 for sure. But again, it depends upon, you know, the fuel, where we are, the intensity level. But, you know, carbohydrates, they're right at the muscle site. They're the ones, you know, that's what's going to be broken down for immediate use. But, you know, the first 3 definitely contribute. Protein we'll see more so for growth and repair of tissue. But yes, carbohydrates and fats primarily are the 2 that are the most, you know, the ones that provide the energy, but the most readily available for energy would be carbohydrates. Okay, so I made some extra notes here. So we have these are just some terminology, some terms that you should be aware of. So DRI, which is dietary reference intake, and what that is, they're a set of scientific developed values for nutrients that help plan and assess the nutrient intake of healthy people. By the way, guys, you'll get the recording on this. And when you get this recording, I don't know, can you guys see my notes on here? Can you see the screen with my notes, the presenter notes?
Yes.
Okay,
Yep.
great.
Yeah.
So this will be on the
Yeah.
recording. I grabbed this right off the internet. All right, so don't be crazy about writing stuff down because you will get it in the recording, and the video will have this information. Okay, RDA. Okay, I'm sure you guys are familiar with this term, recommended daily allowance, but what that is the average daily amount of nutrients that healthy people need to consume to meet their nutrient requirements. So you have to understand, you know, most research is done on a 5-year term. So they'll research for 5 years, and then if necessary, they'll update whatever it is that they need to update. So this is where all this information is coming from. All right, AI, that's adequate intake. So that's dietary recommendations for the average daily amount of nutrients. And you keep hearing me say, healthy person should consume. So healthy person, right? That's what we're talking about. The term I learned, years ago was apparently healthy, because not everybody is 100% healthy. All right, so the term that I learned early on was apparently healthy, and I kind of stick by that. Okay, UL, tolerable upper intake levels. So that is the highest amount of nutrients that can be consumed daily without posing a risk or adverse health effects to most people in a given age group or gender. Okay, what comes to mind right away is protein, because everybody thinks that we need more protein, especially if you're lifting weights, but you got to keep protein in perspective, and then its purpose, which we'll get into in a little bit. All right, okay, AMDR, that's acceptable macronutrient distribution range, and that's for adults, is a range of intake for carbohydrates, protein, and fat that's associated with a reduced risk of chronic disease. Okay, any questions about any of those terms, guys?
Mm-mm.
Okay. Okay, so this is basically the breakdown of where an individual, apparently healthy person's nutrition should be based on, right? So carbohydrates, 45 to 65% of your nutrition, macronutrition, nutrients should come from carbohydrates, because it's available like this, okay? Because when we break down carbohydrates, it is stored right at the muscle site, for immediate use, and then whatever is extra gets stored as fat, okay? The next one is fat, so 20 to 35% of our calories should come from fat, and then the least is 10 to 35%, and that's based on your level of weight training that you do. So the protein's main purpose in the body is for growth and repair of the tissues. All right, so I think people tend to overconsume proteins, but there is an adverse effect to that, as I mentioned in the term. So don't think that if you overeat any of these or undereat any of these, that there's not going to be some sort of effect on the body, because there will be. All right, so we're going to break down carbohydrates a little bit more. So carbohydrates is composed of carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. Okay, essential energy source. I'll just tell you a quick story. I had a client one time, she was always on the latest diet, and now I think it's called the keto diet. Back then it was called Atkins. And I got to her house, and she had been on the Atkins diet probably since my appointment before I saw her, because she was fine the session before. And when she answered the door, she could barely stand. I go, what the heck did you do to yourself, Jerry? And she was in ketosis. That's why now it's called the keto diet. But what she did was seriously depleted her carb intake. And she could barely, I'm not joking when I say that she could barely stand. If you've known anybody that competes bodybuilding, I had a friend that used to do that regularly, and those 2 weeks coming into the competition, I used to tell him, I said, he basically turned, he couldn't function, all right? And that's because it's, carbohydrates also provides a certain, it's when you look at the chain of carbohydrates, it's 1 part carbs and 3 part water. So not only are you reducing your carbohydrate stores in your body from that, but you're also dehydrating yourself. So it's very, you can't sustain life much more than a certain period of time of if you're doing it for competition purposes or so on, because it is an essential source of energy. So you have 3 different types: monosaccharides. These are the simple sugars: glucose, fructose, galactose, and then you have disaccharides, which are also simple: lactose, sucrose, and maltose. And then you have the polysaccharides, which are your complex sugars, which include the starches and the fibers, okay? And that's really where we want to be focusing on, primarily when we eat, you know, when we're eating carbohydrates, because what's the first two, the monosaccharides and disaccharides? Anything that ends in OSE, okay, is going to be a simple sugar, a simple carb. Who would have the most problems with digesting those type of carbs? Or what I should say, if someone did have, you know, drew most of their carbohydrates from those two sources, what disease state can you think about that could eventually
Diabetes.
follow? Correct.
Diabetes.
Absolutely, 100%. Okay. Okay, glycogen. That is when carbohydrates get broken down to glucose to glycogen. Once it goes to glycogen, it's transformed to glycogen. That is the storage form of carbohydrate. Okay, right at the muscle site. Okay, well, this is stored it's stored in the liver, and maintains the blood glucose levels, and right within the skeletal muscle. It's you know, when I think about this, I think about like you know, the supermarket, the shelves on the supermarket. So glycogen is right there, ready to be grabbed, you know, paid for and used. Okay, that's what I think about glycogen. There's something called the glycemic index. And this can be affected by several factors, all right? So food with high glycemic index generally cause a rapid spike in blood sugar after ingestion, and that's the problem with diabetes, right? So when somebody is diagnosed with prediabetes, diabetes, they really need to look at, you know, the level of sugar, okay, the type of sugar, the level of sugar, the added sugar, but they need to really, because foods are the government is trying to do a better job in indicating what that glycemic index is, so that people know that if it's high, it's basically going to cause the sugar levels to go up very rapidly in the blood. And then what's the what does the body do in response to that? What gets elevated as sugar levels get elevated in the blood?
Is it insulin?
Right, but once someone is diagnosed pre-diabetes or diabetic, type 1 diabetes, type 1, they don't produce insulin at all. So they have to, you know, bring in insulin through external sources. But when someone is diagnosed with pre-diabetes or diabetes, they have to be very concerned because their insulin regulation levels are not adequate now because of the damage of you know, simple sugars in the blood. Okay, so it's very important for them to regulate their sugar levels in their blood. Glycemic load reflects the glycemic index and the quantity of carbohydrates in a given food. Okay, so that's what so the glycemic index, if it's on the label, it'll state that, and then based on the number, will determine whether that's, you know, low to high, you know, in terms of, and you know, for everybody, we want to be eating more on the lower side, so we don't have, you know, an effect on our body's ability to regulate, because as I mentioned in past lectures, that, you know, our body likes to maintain homeostasis. So if anything's out of kilter, it's going to do its best to try to regulate that. Crazy story having nothing to do with this, but it just came to mind. I have a client a couple of weeks ago. She accidentally, in the middle of the night, went down to the kitchen while she has her water where her cleaning products are, which most people have under their sink. She grabbed bleach and she drank it. And what happened, she ended up having to be hospitalized for about a week. But what she told me was that that screwed up the sodium levels in the body, and she had trouble walking as a result of that. So but that, you know, I'm talking about homeostasis because our bodies do everything it can regardless. We have, you know, a system for everything in terms of the mechanism of any body, you know, regulation, that whatever's off kilter is going to do what it can to normalize everything, to bring it back to homeostasis. Okay. Okay, so here's the RDA, the recommended daily allowance for carbohydrates, 130 megs per day for normal body function. And that we saw that breakdown. So that's about 45 to 65% of the daily calorie intake. If you don't know the conversion, I actually do this with my students. I have an assignment that I do every semester because I have learned, and we're going to see a nutrition label in a little bit, that most people don't know how to read a nutrition label. So what happens is when you look at a nutrition label, it gives you grams, right? Grams of carbs, grams of fat, grams of protein. But what does that mean in this country? Because we don't work with the metric system. So some of the governments, as I mentioned earlier, they're trying to do a better job in regulating these things so that the layperson can understand. But this is a set number. For every 1 gram of carb, and you should learn this, not just memorize it, but learn that every gram of carb is equal to 4 calories. Okay, so now that makes sense. So if you see on a label per serving that there are 10 grams of carbohydrates, what would that translate into calories?
40.
40 calories.
Correct. Okay, so this is really important information. Okay, so fiber is a type of carbohydrate, or it's found in a lot of carbs in oatmeal. Some, I don't know if you guys know about Dave's Killer Bread, but his bread is high in fiber. But 14, so the fiber intake should be 14 grams per 1,000 kcals is what's recommended. For men less than 50 years old, it's 38 grams per day, and for women, it would be 25 grams per day. Okay, and high fiber diets has been linked to lower cardiovascular disease. Okay,
May I ask a question real quick?
Sure.
You said 130 meg, that's milligrams, right?
Yes.
That sounds extremely low. I'm used to like people eating 130 to 200 grams. I'm just per day.
Well, so this is where what you should do. Right now, we're going to look at a nutrition label. Does anybody know what the recommended daily, what's recommended in terms of total calories per day for the apparently healthy person?
2,000.
2,000.
Right. So we're looking at that 2,000. Out of 2,000, you're going to decide, based on that person's activity level, should they go 45%, 50%, 55%, up to 65%, right? Who would we recommend a 45% out of 2,000?
A person that's losing weight, maybe?
Or just the average individual, right? Who would we recommend someone go more towards the 65%?
Somebody who's working out a lot?
Yeah, right. An athlete, someone who works out regularly, pretty intense, each week. So I would go based on that. I'm not really too keen on the 2,000 calorie for the average person because I just think that's way too many calories for the average individual. But if someone's exercising, depending on their intensity level and the frequency of, how many days a week they work out, I would then take that percentage and determine whatever that calorie range is. So if it's 2,000 calories, what do you recommend? 45, anywhere on that spectrum, 45 to 65% of the 2,000 calories, which is what the RDA recommends, should come from carbohydrates. So I would go based on that, rather than in any other numbers. But these numbers are coming from, research from, government sites for nutrition. Okay. Okay, so fiber we talked about. Did that answer your question? There's a lot of stuff out there, guys, nutrition-wise. We will talk about something in a little bit in terms of where we fall on the spectrum. Remember, we're not registered dietitians or nutritionists unless you are. So all you can do is recommend research-supported data to your clients. You can't just make up. If you're going from some site, you better make sure that that information is is something that that is supported by the RDA.
I'm just slightly confused because there's 1,000 milligrams in a gram. So if you have somebody eating so many grams a day, I mean, that's say 130 grams, that's 130,000 milligrams. Like, how is that enough for a normal body functioning per day?
Yes, you probably know more about that when it gets into the grams and the milligrams. Like I said, I go based on whatever I'm recommending total calories. I'll take that amount. So if it's, 2,000 calories, I'm going to decide whether or not that person should be consuming 45, 50% of that. And that will give me the calories in carbohydrates, if that makes sense. And then where the label falls in is that if something has, as I mentioned before, 10 grams of carbs and every gram is 4 calories. Now we have 40. Let's say I'm recommending, let's say it's 1,000 calories. Then we know that that food product right there is 40 calories out of 1,000 calories from carbohydrates. Okay, so I go based on that in terms of the milligrams and the grams. I just go with the grams to convert. Okay, so you may know a little bit more than that than I know.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, now we're switching to fat. So it's essential for thermoregulation, and it is there to protect vital organs. So we do, the bottom line is that there is a percentage of fat that is essential, okay, is what we're saying here. And for the reasons why, it's because it protects the organs, distribution of fat-soluble vitamins, energy production, and the formation of cell membranes. Okay, so that's fat's function in the body. There are different types of fats, triglycerides. This is stored as adipose, which is fat. Okay, that's the stored fat. Here's another conversion that you should know. So we already said carbohydrates, 1 gram of carbs is 4 calories, 1 gram of fat is 9 calories. So this is something you should definitely learn and commit to knowledge, okay, to memory. Okay, so then you have cholesterol, and we know a lot about cholesterol in terms of the harm it can do with its regards to risk for heart disease, but it still is essential in the body. We can't totally deplete cholesterol because its purpose is cell membranes use it. It's also used for hormones, okay, steroidal hormones. And then you have phospholipids, and that also is involved in the cell membrane structure. Okay, so fat does serve a role in the body. It just depends on the percentage of fat that we have, right? So we want our percentage. I think the next slide might talk about it is less than 30% on average, but they also go based on BMI. So additional lipoproteins. This allows fat to travel through the blood. Saturated fat, basically we get that through animals, and it also is found in plant-based foods such as palm, coconut oil, coconut butter, but the recommendations is to limit saturated fats to less than 10% of the total calories from fat, okay? Unsaturated fat, so these would be our monounsaturated, polyunsaturated, and then we have something called trans fat. Keep intake as low as possible. This is found in cakes and cookies and things like that, okay? We're going to get in chapter 20, we'll talk about eating disorders, and we'll discuss that a little bit more. So our fat intake should be anywhere between 20 and 35% of the total calories. So if we're talking about that 2,000 recommended calorie intake per day, we're going to take 20 to 35% of that. And then again, you should know that for every gram of fat, it's 9 calories. Okay, on to proteins. So proteins are composed of carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, and nitrogen. All proteins are combinations of amino acids. There are 20 amino acids that are required by the body. What type of eating, if you were working with a specific client that told you they ate a certain way, why would you need to be concerned about the amino acids? Anybody know what I'm talking about? Type of diet?
Like vegetarians.
Yeah, vegans in particular, but yes, vegetarians too, but more so vegans, right? Because we don't get all of these 20 amino acids. It's not produced naturally. Some of it comes through our food. So, vegans in particular have to make sure that their diet is balanced in a way, the plant-based diet is balanced in a way where they get all of the essential amino acids. So 9 are essential and must come from food. This is what I was just mentioning. So if you do have somebody that has any food restrictions, this could be an issue. The combination of amino acid determines protein function. All right, bodies, can't function without protein. All right, like I said, it's growth and repair, but based on what people have learned about proteins, people feel that if they have more, that it's going to do more, and that's not necessarily the case. But from this standpoint, it does have a purpose in terms of how it affects the body's ability to operate. Go too far. Okay, here. Functions of protein. So this is what protein does. It carries oxygen on hemoglobin that's in the blood cell, catalyzes reactions, so enzyme reactions in the body, facilitates muscle contraction. We talked about this last week. Actin and myosin, right? When I talked about the sliding filament theories, that was the actin and the myosin. Serves as connective tissue, collagen, facilitates blood clotting. Okay, acts as a messenger, so protein hormones such as growth hormones, and then fights diseases, so antibodies, okay, or need protein, okay. Protein intake, so that should roughly be 10 to 35% of the daily calories. Another important calculation, so carbohydrates and proteins, per gram, it's 4 calories. The only difference is fat, which is 9 calories per gram. All right, so you just have to remember 4 for carb protein and 9 for fats. Okay, the average adult only requires 0.8 grams per kilogram of body weight. Okay, so you would have to convert a person's body weight to kilograms, and then there is a formula that, and there are things, you don't even have to go through the calculations. You can actually look this up, and there are sites that will do the calculation for you. But the average individual, it is 0.8 grams per kilogram. If you look at the last bullet point, the range for intense exercise is 1.2 to 2.0. Okay, so when I work with my students, I actually have them run the calculations for the highest, all right? So the 2.0, and they're still over consuming, all right? So we definitely take in way too much protein than we need, all right? And what happens if we take in too much protein? What's gonna happen? If we don't use it, what are we doing with it?
Can be stored as fat.
Correct. Okay, but it also produces nitrogen, and it does cause a wear on the kidneys. Okay, so there is an adverse effect of consuming too much protein, the lowest being it's stored as fat, but there can be some additional health risk if you overdose on protein. The fourth bullet point, children need more than the average adult due to rapid growing bodies. Okay, I think we can all understand that. So this range, this intense exercise range from 1.2 to 2.0, obviously it depends on the volume of activity that individual is doing. Okay, moving on to vitamins. Anybody have questions at this point? Okay, so we have organic, carb-containing substances, essential for normal body functioning. 14 vitamins divided into 2 groups. We have fat-soluble and water-soluble. So the fat-soluble vitamins are vitamins like A, D, E, and K, and they're stored in the body. And water-soluble vitamins are B and C, and they're not stored in the body, so they're typically consumed daily. So what I usually, first of all, I'll start off saying, anybody take vitamins on a regular basis?
Yeah, I do.
Okay,
Yes.
do you happen to notice, not to get too personal, but maybe an hour or 2 after you consume the vitamins, you tend to notice the color of your urine?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or a different, like a yellowish color, a little different than the dark yellow that you might see when you first wake up and go to the bathroom. But basically what that is your body's ridding those water-soluble vitamins that it doesn't need. So Americans actually have been termed having the most expensive urine in the world, because that we're, We overconsume vitamins, and if our body doesn't need it, it gets rid of it. Fat soluble, not so much. They can build up in the body, so you have to be really careful in terms of what you recommend. Potassium being one of them. If you have a client that's cramping, do not recommend potassium. That's way above our skill level. Okay, a doctor or a nutritionist needs to do that, but more importantly, they really need to be tested. But there would be no reason why you couldn't recommend potassium rich foods. Maybe they're dehydrated, they need to consume water. But just be careful if you are recommending any of this. You really should have them consult a physician or a nutritionist, dietitian for so they can have blood work done to see what they're deficient in.
Is that the same truth for sports drinks?
So, probably the only one that really holds its claim in terms of research is probably Gatorade. I don't necessarily recommend sports drinks as a rule. Even I talk about this with my students each semester about these pre-workouts and the post-workout and during the workout and all that. If you look at the garbage that's in some of this stuff, especially what is pre-workout? Caffeine based, right?
It's just caffeine, yeah.
Yeah, you pay a lot of money for it. I tell my students go to a Starbucks and jack up on whatever. Not that their coffee's not expensive, but get their high octane caffeine. It's the same thing except that you're going to the GNC or wherever you're getting your stuff. Yeah, I typically do not recommend anything. I might bring something to if I find that a client of mine is having some issues. I try to talk with them and just get some more information. But at the end of the day, my recommendation is always going to be go to your physician, have some blood done, and let's see where you're at. Okay. Because you don't know. I have a client right now who is dealing with anemia, but we can argue and say, okay, have iron-rich foods, but she went to her doctor and it's more than that now. They're looking at to see that she might be bleeding someplace within her intestines. She's already had a colonoscopy and endoscopy, but both of those tests only go so far. So there's a section where they can't get to. So usually what they'll have that individual do is digest a pill that has a camera in it, and then they can look further into the system to see if there's bleeding that's occurring somewhere that is kind of an obscure area, and that's what's causing the anemia. So you got to be careful when you're recommending these things because you just don't know the whole story. So best that they bring it to their attention. If they're feeling a certain way, maybe they're saying something that you heard from another client that rings a bell, and they're feeling tired or whatever, and you could, without saying any names, you could share, there's somebody else I work with that had, some symptoms similar to what you're stating. What I recommend is to go see your doctor, okay, and take it from that route. Always better to err on the side of caution. You don't want to have somebody come back and sue you because you diagnosed them. They trusted you, and now something's backfired on you. Okay. Okay, so overconsumption of either fat-soluble and water-soluble vitamins can lead to toxic effects, right? The potential is greater with fat-solubles, as I explained. UL are the highest levels of daily intake that will likely not result in an adverse health outcome. So again, this is all based on research, guys. When they, when you look at a vitamin bottle, they're going to tell you, what's the recommended allowance per day for that vitamin based on research, and what that one dose contains out of that. It usually gives you a percentage. It gives you the total amount that should be consumed and how much is actually in that product. And that also is in some of the food, also listed on some of the food labels. Okay, minerals. So they're inorganic elements. Serve a variety of functions in the body. Major minerals are the macronutrients, all right? So calcium, phosphorus, potassium, sulfur, sodium, chloride, and magnesium. Trace minerals, so those are the micro minerals, and this is things like zinc, selenium, magnesium, some of these are moly, whatever that one is, copper, fluoride, iodine, iron. So these are examples of your micro minerals and your macro minerals. Okay, so yeah, these were, actually, no, we'll get into the over. So under consumed minerals, calcium is one of them, okay? You guys have heard of osteoporosis, I'm sure, but a deficiency in calcium is aligned with osteopenia, osteoporosis, but don't always assume that it's just because of a lack of consumption of that. A person could be consuming the right amount, because I did have this with a client, but the body's not absorbing it, okay? And often this is why doctors will recommend vitamin D, because that helps with absorption. But I know I did have a client that it didn't matter what she did, her body just didn't absorb calcium. So it's found in milk, dark green vegetables, and nuts. And RDA is higher for youth and adults over 50, okay? Youth because they're still growing, and adults because of the risk of osteoporosis, and the bones get brittle with age. Iron is another underconsumed mineral. It is a common deficiency in the United States. It is a component of hemoglobin. I talked about anemia, so iron deficiency is usually linked with people becoming anemic. Necessary for the immune system, formation of brain neurotransmitters, and then you typically find iron in red meat, eggs, spinach, lima and navy beans, and prune juice. Okay, so I find it helpful that I tend to try to be cognizant of foods that are rich in certain things, just so that if something does come up with a client, if I find that they're cramping a lot, I'll recommend again, go to the doctor first, obviously, but maybe try eating foods that are rich in whatever the issue is, and then see if that helps. If not, then they're always better off getting it through their food, okay, as opposed to taking a supplement. Okay, another overconsumed mineral is sodium. Excessive intake is linked to hypertension, right, which is high blood pressure. So people that are what I would call salt sensitive, merely ingesting sodium will increase their blood pressure. Okay, more so the systolic than the diastolic, the top number. So the recommendation is 1,500 milligrams per day with a limit of 2,300 milligrams. Okay, so the range is 15 to 23 milligrams per day. But again, that all depends. If somebody's salt sensitive, they might even have to cut back that. Again, we're talking about the apparently healthy individual. Reduce consumption of processed foods and add less salt during food preparation. Have you ever seen anybody that doesn't even taste the food and they're dousing it with salt? My dad used to do that, made me nuts. What's the thing with processed food? Why do processed foods tend to have a higher level of sodium?
Preserves them.
Yeah, preserves them, makes them taste good, right? But there are people just because of the consumption of salt, they become hypertensive. All right, so especially if you know anybody in your life that just doesn't even taste the food and they're throwing salt on, you might want to bring this to their attention so that they, have an understanding that they should taste stuff first and then, add a little bit of salt as needed. Okay, water. So at least 60% of our total body weight is in the form of water, okay? Provides an environment for metabolic processes. Helps regulate body temperature and transport substances through the body, right? So body temperature would be through sweating. And the recommendations is 3.7 liters per day for men and 2.7 for women. What are some of the recommendations that you guys have heard in terms of water consumption?
Gallon a day.
No, 8 glasses a day.
Okay, yeah.
Half an ounce per pound of body weight.
Okay. Yep, anybody else? So I've
I've heard the gallon a day.
Yeah, right. So 64 ounces typically, but you know, an ounce per body weight might be a lot. Typically, they say cut your body weight in half. So if you're 100 pounds, just as an example, then cut that in half would be 50 ounces of water. Did you guys hear? I don't know, it was last summer, the summer before, there was a woman that actually killed herself by consuming too much water.
Yeah, I heard about
Oh,
that.
yeah, I heard about that. Yeah,
Yeah, she was out on the boat, I think, in the sun, and she was, you know, she was really parched, so she consumed a lot of water in a short period of time. And again, that homeostasis, guys, I think she threw her sodium levels off. There was a whole bunch of things she did with that, I'm sure. Yeah, her body couldn't regulate itself from that, and she ended up dying. So, young woman with children and all. So, yeah, crazy. So, you know, like I've been saying, you know, there's adverse effect regardless how, you know, under or over. Okay, we want to find that, you know, that balance, that sweet spot for the average individual. Okay, so examining dietary intake. So the best thing that you could probably ask your clients to do is to keep a food log. All right. So if they're struggling with, you know, with their diet, if you could ask them to create, maybe you even want to, you know, come up with something on the computer. You could certainly look online and see, you know, what's out there right now that you might be able to use, and you know, give it to them and just say, just be very honest. Don't change anything. Give me 3 days of what you eat, okay? From the time you wake up to the time you go to bed. And if you wake up in the middle of the night, please be, you know, honest about whatever you consume throughout the middle of the night. And then you can go through this with them. You can do calculations for them, give them an idea of what they're consuming per day. So if they're struggling with, you know, weight loss, and, you know, most of us consume way more than the daily allowance. You know, I do an assignment with my students that's coupled with the nutrition label, where I have them go and evaluate a commercial menu, because I don't know if you know, I don't remember exactly when this started, but years back, the government mandated that if a food establishment had more than 10 locations, they were now required by law to list the calorie contents on their menu. So this is anywhere from fast food, McDonald's, Taco Bell, you know, Burger King, any of those places, to higher end restaurants. I'm sure you're familiar with Cheesecake Factory, and you know, there's a bunch of others, but I mentioned Cheesecake Factory because they're one of the biggest offenders. I mean, I think they have a main course that's 3,500 calories. And we know that people don't just eat that, right? They come in, they start with the bread and the butter, they have a drink and maybe an appetizer, maybe a salad with dressing. Now they're eating their main course, and then they might follow it up with, you know, a dessert. So they're consuming ridiculous amounts of calories. So if you have them keep a food log, you know, you can kind of like identify things that, you know, have, you know, big amounts of calories, and kind of talk them through what they can do to sub, or how to, you know, how to regulate that so that they can achieve their goals. So for valid results, include everything consumed. I just talked about that. A log for 3 to 4 days. And it's saying here at least one weekend, right? Because we know people like to, you know, let their guards down on the weekend. What are some of the common problems with food diaries? So people tend to underreport, right, what they're eating. People do not keep records that are specific enough to provide high quality information. People often temporarily change how they eat when they record their food. So, you know, just going back to the second one, you know, see if they can be as specific as possible in terms of the quantity they eat, right? So one of the things I talk about with my students when, you know, we're looking at food labels, I want them to have an idea of the amount that they consume based on what the label's saying. So I say, let's just take cereal as an example, right? We all know, open up the box of cereal, take the box, you don't even measure it, you put it into the bowl, as much as the bowl will hold, you know, and then enough for the milk, correct? So I tell my students, all right, so now we need to know how many servings you're eating based on what the nutrition label states. So I want you to do what you always do, pour it into the bowl, but then stop. Get a measuring cup and then measure all of that. And then this way you'll have an idea now how many servings you're consuming. Okay, and that really seems to open people's eyes a little bit. So, so we want them to provide you with as much information so that you can help them the best. If you're training, people's homes, I think I might have mentioned this. They, ask them, after they, if they start to bring it up and they want your help with it, again, within the boundaries of personal training. But, maybe if they do bring it up, you might ask, would you allow me to open up your cabinets, look into your refrigerator, and look around? Look, I mean, I have clients I go to, and I know it's more her than him, but they have this tremendous bowl that for years, that is in the living room, right, or the TV room, let's call it. And, it's funny because every week, usually when I'm leaving, I train the husband, then I'll train the wife. And when I'm leaving, I'll say goodbye to the husband. And I always look at that bowl. So then I've known, like the week before, it might be down where it was almost to the bottom. And then the next week it's back up. So I know she went out shopping and she filled that bowl. And then the next week I'll get back there and the bowl will be down again. So, and she's constantly challenged with her weight. He, not so much, but she, yes. I'm sure I've mentioned at certain points where I'm like, maybe you might want to think of not having that bowl right where you sit on the couch and watch TV all night. Okay, so here's the dietary guidelines. You see there's a range, 2020 to 2025, again, based on research. So basically the guidelines help people make healthy food choices, focus on promoting health and lowering risk for chronic disease, acknowledge the complex interaction of factors that influence food consumption, and identifies a variety of health eating patterns. Okay, so this is what you want to focus on if you're helping clients, are the dietary guidelines, okay, for Americans. Okay, some countries don't even have any guidelines. So guideline 1. Follow a healthy dietary pattern at every life stage, right? Because depending, we're talking about, and next week, no, the last lecture 5, we get into special pops. So we'll talk about top populations, young, pregnant, seniors, and so on. So, that's what we mean when we say life stage. Where is that person now at? And, the dietary needs change depending on that. Guideline 2, customize and enjoy foods and beverage choices to reflect personal preference, cultural traditions, and budgetary considerations, right? If someone's hiring you to come into their house, I'm sure budgetary issues are not an issue. But, if you have someone that money is not an issue, they might be going out to dinner, a heck of a lot more than somebody, that doesn't have that kind of money. So I just had this conversation with a client on this morning because she's been noticing that she had issues with her ankle swelling, but she always knew that if she laid down and put her legs up for a period of time, it would pretty much get rid of that. But now she's seeing it's happening on a continuum. So the only thing that changed in her life recently is that she just got married. She's 68. Her husband moved in with her, obviously. And, he likes to eat much later than she's accustomed to. They've been going out to dinner more frequently. I'm sure she's, making things for him that she wouldn't have normally made for herself. So, I just kind of opened her eyes to that. I'm like, maybe that's the reason why. Maybe you're taking in more sodium or whatever it is. But there's something going on, that's making her body retain the water. And the only thing that's changed over the last couple of months was her marital status. So, sometimes it's just worth, mentioning that to people, because they may not think about it. Guideline 3, focus on meeting food group needs with nutrition-dense foods and beverages and stay within calorie limits, right? So nutrition-dense foods, we want, that's why I always, if I'm having people over, I like to have a crudité. Like I'd rather do, people, most of the time people are, craving, if they're craving sweet, chocolate or candy or something, it's the sweetness of it. If they close their eyes and ate an apple, okay, I did apple slices, it's going to have the same effect on the body. They're going to get the sugar that their body wants. It may not be as appealing as a piece of chocolate to the eye, but once it gets in and it's digested, it's going to have the same response. So people will take chips and pretzels and things like that because they want the crunch. Well, give them carrots, okay? Or, again, you might have to, consider what, if the person's diabetic and things like that and glycemic index. But, if it's crunchy food is what they want, then there's a variety of those that are much healthier than chips and things like that, okay? Guideline, for example, if I'm doing like hummus or any sort of dip, I'll often cut up cucumbers, discs of cucumbers, and use that, okay? They get the crunch, a lot healthier, a lot less calories. All right, so guideline 4, limit foods and beverages higher in added sugar, saturated fat and sodium, and limit alcohol beverages. All right, so we kind of talked a lot about the sugar and saturated fat and sodium. All right, any questions, guys, so far?
No.
Good. All right, I really want to get to, we still have a few more. Okay, we're good.
I have a question.
Sure.
Is this lecture recorded? Because I missed some of it.
Yes, they were all recorded. Yes, and then
Okay.
Jay,
All right.
okay.
Okay. All right.
Oh yeah, Joseph, I just saw you said I've been in ketosis for both bodybuilding and wrestling. Joe, I'm sorry I mentioned that. So yeah, Joe, he writes, I've been in ketosis for both bodybuilding and wrestling, not fun. Joe, you want to share your experience? No, don't mean to put you on the spot if you don't. Okay, healthy eating patterns in the dietary guidelines. So approaches include healthy U.S. style patterns based on previous USDA food patterns, and the DASH dietary approach to stop hypertension diet. Mediterranean diet, I'm sure you guys have heard, that's all the buzz. Vegan diets. My sister, a vegetarian actually is what this one is. My sister's been a vegan for years. Way before her son was born, and he's a vegan. If you ask him if he wants a hamburger, he'll tell you that he doesn't eat cows. He's about to be 15 next month. Now the new term seems to be plant-based, and I think that that's probably getting. I mean, my sister did it because she was also an activist with PETA, so which is the animal rights group. So that's why she started. But the Mediterranean diet, there's a lot of research out there about its effects, and I might have mentioned this already. Something to definitely look up. I think it was National Geographic's. They teamed up with this guy that was studying blue zones, which there are, I think, 5 or so throughout the world, and why people live to long, to 100 or greater, and what it is that they're consuming and doing in those areas that are allowing for that. Food label regulations, they're constantly improving that. They still have a long way to go. More importantly is that these regulations have to then be regulated, right? And that's probably where they're falling short. So to allow consumers to evaluate the nutrition content of food. And I have seen food labels that put that 449, the conversion, but not all of them do. And I think that's very important, because otherwise people don't understand that, what grams mean. Okay, so here's a typical nutrition label. I know this is a little bit small, but the government has done a lot in terms of making this more understandable. So at the very top, you'll often see what a serving size is, and then how many servings there are in this, in that particular product. So in this case, 1 cup is the serving. It's stating that there were 2 servings. So that means there's 2 cups. If I were to dump whatever this is out and measured it, I would get 2 cups because there's 2 servings. And then it's followed by the number of calories per serving. Here, they're also telling us how much of it is fat. So we're looking at, not half, but close to it. And then it gives the breakdown of total fats. There's cholesterol, sodium, potassium. It gives you carbohydrates, and it gives you protein, right? So the way we would convert this is we would go total fats 12 times what to convert the grams of fat?
9.
9.
Right, and then carbohydrates 31 times what?
4.
And protein 5 times?
4.
9.
All right, and if we added all that up, we would get an idea of where, or just even individually, we get an idea of out of the 250, how many, instead of just grams, so we know that 12 grams are of fat are within that 250, but if we do the conversion, we understand now that 12 times 9 and the amount of calories that is from out of 250. Okay, so that's why it's important. This label, it does talk about the daily allowance at the bottom, that 2,000 calories is the recommended daily allowance. It does give some information about, you know, out of a 2,000 or 2,500, how many, you know, with total fat, saturated fat, cholesterol, and so on. So it does give you a little bit more than maybe some. It gives you vitamins. It tells you the percentage of vitamin A, vitamin C, calcium, iron, minerals. You know, this product, it's 20% of it is there's 20% calcium in this product. Okay, so the government is definitely doing a better job at making, you know, having companies produce labels on their food products that are easier to read. But you know, where I still see they're falling short is their regulation of. Okay, when I, you know, just circling back to the commercial menus, right? So when companies had to first put their calorie content per item, they probably were in a lab, they were making these things, right? Everything was measured. Do you think they're doing that? You guys know what Cheesecake Factory is, right? I'm sure you have them in Chicago.
Yeah,
we do.
Okay, you think on a Saturday night that if you look at their menu and something says 1,000 calories, and now they're making it and they're there's a 30-minute wait, you know, for people to be seated. You think that they're measuring the way they did when they first put those, you know, did the testing to put that on the menu? You think that, you know, they're going to be accurate? Absolutely not. Okay, so even with the calorie content on the menu, I'm sure when that plate arrives at your table on a busy Saturday night or any day of the week, it's probably more calories than what you're seeing on the menu, which is sad to say. So there's where the regulation falls short. Okay, lifestyle approaches to improving blood lipid profile. Okay, so consume a diet low in saturated fat and cholesterol, right? These are the two things that really drive up, you know, and cause increased risk for cardiovascular disease. Lose weight if needed. Participate in regular aerobic exercise. Specific guidelines on saturated fats, trans fats, and cholesterol. So we want to limit saturated fats to less than 10% of the total calories. So if we're using that 2,000 recommended daily allowance, then less than 10% of fat. Okay, so you have your range of fat, but out of that total range, so let's say it's 30% that you're eating, less than 10% of that 30% should come from saturated fat. Okay, this may be lowered for someone with existing cardiovascular disease. So again, depending on, you know, the stage of life, depending on risk of disease or presence of disease, you may have to make changes to that. Consume as little trans fat and cholesterol as possible, right? Because it's all the stuff that, you know, could potentially cause issues within the blood vessels, because this stuff likes to adhere to the vessels, which narrows them and then makes it difficult for blood to pass through. Balance omega-6 with omega-3 for cardioprotective benefits. Okay, I'm sure you've heard eating salmon, right? That contains omegas that will help reduce someone's risk for cardiovascular disease. Okay, so this chart, this is table of 5, 6, it's in your textbook. Basically, it goes through, you know, what's desirable in total cholesterol, but years ago, they changed this. You can't just, you know, focus on, when you get your blood work, you can't just focus on the total cholesterol number. You really need to know the second and the third one, which is the HDL and the LDL, right? So the HDL are the high density lipoproteins, and the L is low density. Which one is the bad one, HDL or LDL?
LDL.
Correct. People seem to think H because it's high, okay? High density lipoprotein, low density lipoprotein. High density lipoprotein is increased through exercise, and LDLs, low density lipoprotein, is decreased through diet, okay? But we want to keep the LDLs lower, and so we need to really be considering what the HDLs are and the LDLs, and not just look at the total. Okay, because you can have somebody with desirable less than 200 cholesterol, but their LDLs are off the charts, right? The major amount of that, let's say if it was 180 is coming from LDLs, there's a problem. Okay, and then triglycerides, it gives the ranges there in terms of what, anything less than 150 is considered normal. And there is with Big Pharma, there's a huge push to keep reducing this. I learned from my professor when I was going for my exercise physiology master's. He was told to go on cholesterol medication, and he maybe now he changed his mind, but back when I was studying, he was avoiding it like the plague, which is basically what I do too, because there is an issue, like we've discussed, too much or too little. Big Pharma is trying to push doctors to keep dispensing cholesterol meds to get the cholesterol down, but your body needs cholesterol, like we've already discussed. So if you keep reducing that number, there could be effect. There's something called rhabdomyolysis, breakdown of muscle tissue. You have to be careful. So you really need to have a good understanding of all this. All right, so hydration we're getting into now. So goals. So it's to prevent excessive dehydration. We want greater than 2%. We already talked about how 60%, I even heard 70% of our body is made up of water. So we talked about, all the things we've heard in terms of hydration. When you're younger, you have thirst as a mechanism for dehydration, but by the time you're thirsty, you're already dehydrated. As we get older, that sense of thirst diminishes, so they don't have that as a guideline anymore. So you often see, like on a hot day during the summer, you could go to ER, and a lot of people that'll be there will be older people just going in for, let's say, 4 hours that are being rehydrated, and then they're let go because their bodies are not equipped to deal with the heat, and they're not consuming enough water. So they end up often ending up in the hospital because of it. So before exercise, 4 hours before, you should consume what's recommended here, 5 to 7 milliliters of water or a sports beverage per kilogram of body weight. 2 hours before, consume an additional 3 to 5 milliliters per kilogram if no urine output or if urine is dark. So that's a good sign. That's what I go by. I'll ask, someone says to tell me that they're not feeling right or whatever, and it's a hot day, I immediately go to the urine, okay? Have you been urinating the same amount that you usually urinate on any regular given day? What color is it, okay? Because it's only your darkest urine should be that first urine when you wake up in the morning, and then after that it should be, it's still, it'll look colorless in the toilet bowl, but if you've gone for a urine test, you see that it is still yellow, but it should appear almost colorless in the toilet bowl after that first urination in the morning. If that's not happening, that's a short sign right there that the person is dehydrated. It can escalate even worse, where the skin starts to, if you pinched it and it stays puckered, that is a sign of it. But this can really, lead to some severe problems if a person isn't properly hydrated. So it's really important that a person does make sure that they do that. Okay, hydration for exercise. So during exercise, replace fluids based on environmental conditions, intensity of exercise, and individual sweat rate. There, you can go on. I'm not sure if the textbook talks about this, but there are formulas to determine how much sweat you lose during exercise. Okay, so you can look that up. But typically, 400 to 800 milliliters of water is adequate. After exercise, you want to fully replace fluids equal to the volume of sweat loss. So again, there are formulas. There are, I'm sure online you could put the information in. When I was learning, I was told, weigh yourself before you go out for a run, go out for the run, come back, take off your sweaty clothes, whisk all, as much sweat as you can off your body, weigh yourself again. Any weight loss should be converted to ounces, and that's the amount of water that you should consume. I might have talked about this already, I'm not sure, but if you're dealing with, let's say, long distance athletes, they're, runners in particular, you have somebody that's a marathon runner, often there are tables set up along the course and they have cups of water, but if somebody grabs the cup, the water's spilling, it's hard for them to really know. But if you could figure out what their sweat rate is and how much water they need to consume, then you can do a consumption test. So you can have them consume water, put it in their mouth, okay, swallow it. If they're able to do that comfortably, the next time do the same thing, but don't swallow it. Put it back in the cup, have them spit it back into the cup, measure that out, okay? And now you can measure that in ounces, and then you could let them know how many of, swallow they would have to do in order to stay hydrated, right? I think I talked about that person, I didn't know him, but who infarcted his colon. I told you guys about that.
No, you did. I think you mentioned it.
Yeah. So, and this guy knew his body, but hot day, high humidity, temperatures were high, and he was more than trained, and for whatever reason, he didn't hydrate properly. So he ended up, with a major problem. Okay, all right, protein intake for athletes. Food-based proteins preferred over supplements. Recommended to space daily protein needs throughout the day rather than in one shot. So we're talking about if you have somebody that is, endurance training, it's intense, okay? Weight training, any high resistance training. We're talking about, remember, it was 0.8 for the average individual. Now we're jumping it up here. For intense endurance athletes, we're talking about 1.2 to 1.4. And now when you're getting to high volume, high intensity resistance, so weight training, now we're looking at a range of 1.6 to 2.0 per kilogram of body weight. Okay, so it just depends. 0.8 for the average person, intense endurance, 1.2 to 1.4, high volumes of weight training, now we're talking about 1.6 to 2.0. Strict vegetarians may require consultation with a dietitian for sure. Okay, just to make sure they're getting, those all their essential amino acids. Carbohydrate loading. You may have heard about this. There is a protocol for this, which is right here. You just can't eat a pasta dinner the night before, okay, if you're gonna run a marathon. There is a process. So for events lasting more than 90 minutes, the protocol is day 1, no training with diet containing 10 to 12 grams per kilogram of body weight. Day 2, no training with dietary containing 10 to 12, so same as day 1. And day 3, event or competition day, use existing carbohydrate intake guidelines before, during, and after exercise, okay? So depending on the athlete you work with, there are places that online that you can, GOO is one of them where they can, put in if they know how much carbohydrates they need. I was just talking to somebody about this. Their husband is he does the triathlons, and GOO isn't enough for him. He's got to really be conscious of what he has. Obviously, when he's swimming, that's not an issue, but when he's biking and he's running, he's got to make sure that he has the adequate carbohydrate available to him, because he's doing, a full marathon. I forgot what the bike was, and then the swimming. It's just insane. So these people really need, typically these people know their bodies pretty well. Okay, carbohydrate intake prior to events. So immediately before exercise, the guidelines for carbohydrate intake are as follows. So 1 hour before, 1 gram per kilogram of body weight, 2 hours, 2 grams. So basically it follows the hours, okay? All right, I'm just gonna go because we're gonna, we have about 5 slides and then we'll take a break, guys. Okay, carbohydrate intake during continuous vigorous activity. Consume easy to absorb forms of carbohydrate. That's where I was talking about this GOO. You could check this out online, but there are companies that make customized carbohydrates for athletes, and again, they're easily absorbed by the body. Carbohydrate beverages, beverage solutions or sport drinks are composed of 6 to 8% carbohydrate solution, which is optimal for absorption. As I mentioned before, Gatorade, I think, is one of the sports drinks that's research supported. Carbohydrate intake during continuous vigorous activity. So the guidelines for carbohydrate ingestion during exercise include the following. Exercising less than 45 minutes, generally no carbohydrate intake is needed, right? So that's, the person that's going to the gym. Endurance exercise lasting 1 to 2.5 hours, you want to consume 30 to 60 grams per hour. Endurance exercise lasting more than 2.5 to 3 hours, consume up to 90 grams per hour. Note, at this level of carbohydrate intake, multiple forms of carbohydrates must be used as formulated in many sports drinks, okay? Yeah, if you're not familiar with working with athletes like this, I would, definitely learn as much as you can before you take somebody like this on. Carbohydrate intake following endurance activities where glycogen depletion occurs. So for optimal glycogen resynthesis, the recommendation is to consume 1 to 1.2 grams of carbohydrates per kilogram of body weight for the first 4 hours post-activity, and then to resume eating to meet the daily carbohydrate intake goals. Okay. Any questions, guys? 2 more slides, this one and one more, and then we'll take a break. All right, suboptimal energy availability. So basically, optimal energy availability, I have more notes here, is the amount of energy you have available after subtracting exercise energy expenditure from the energy intake. And this is relative to your fat-free mass, all right? So there's something called the female athlete triad. Spectrum of complications, you may have heard of this, that female athletes could end up experiencing through exercise. There might be an issue with their menstrual cycle and bone health. Okay, so you want to make sure that this is if you're not consuming what you need, that there's a risk for that. Okay, relative energy deficiency in sports. Wide range of complications due to low energy availability in males and females with or without disordered eating or eating disorders. Okay, and we'll talk about those when we come back from break. So just getting back to the OEA, or the optimal energy, it's calculated as calories consumed minus exercise calories burned divided by fat-free mass. So you'd have to know the person's fat-free mass. Okay. All right, last slide. All right, so scope of practice. This is where when we talk about scope of practice, we're just saying, you have to work within the guidelines of the personal training profession. All right, so you keep hearing me say that, we're not doctors, we're not, unless we are, registered dietitians, nutritionists. So you would need to then refer that person to those experts if that's, what's required. But, if we're going to start consulting, our clients on diet, you need to stick to the guidelines, or you need to recommend them to a registered dietitian, nutritionist. Many states, including New York, have licenses for these individuals, so you need, that's what I would recommend. Make sure that they do have a license. Fitness professionals may provide nutrition education as long as it's consistent of general non-medical information. So again, circling back to what we talked about earlier, give information based on the dietary guidelines for Americans, and I would have that available and give them a copy of it. This way, you're not interpreting it in a way they can read it for themselves and see, and if they have questions, they can come back and ask. Okay, but as long as you're following guidelines, the sound guidelines, then you're working within the scope of practice for personal trainers. But if you start diagnosing and something goes wrong, you're looking at a potential lawsuit. Okay, which I don't think any of us want. All right, any questions right now? All right, we're going to take a break. It's coming up on 5 after, so let's come back. Let's come back at just before 7:15 for you guys. So like 7. Let's call it 7:14. Okay, and then we'll finish up the the other slides, which is going to be chapter 20. Okay, everybody good?
Sounds good. Thank you.
Okay, enjoy your break, guys.
That's good.
right, everybody back with me?
Yes.
All right. How's the heat in Chicago, guys?
Sticky.
Yeah,
Super
hot.
hot.
Yeah, we're just starting that heat wave. So it's the how was your winter though? Not that bad, right?
No, it wasn't bad.
No, it's not as
It's been
snowy.
worse. It's been worse.
It's been worse. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
yeah. No, it's just so funny because everybody wants it to get warm, but then once this heat sets in, it's like everybody starts complaining about that. All right, so do you guys agree with me that this lecture isn't as intense as last week?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes. Yeah.
Absolutely.
All right, good. Yeah, I kind of like this lecture because, you know, especially with the nutrition label, the more that you learn about that and the more that you can help, because you're going to find people just don't know. I mean, that's why I started adding it as an assessment, you know, a lecture, but then it became an assessment for my students, you know, at the college, because I was blown away at how many people really don't have a real understanding about nutrition label. This is something that's in front of us every day, all day long, right? So if you can start making your clients, you know, just even more aware of looking at the label, you know, you're going to start to make some inroads in terms of, you know, they're, you know, at least then they become a little bit more conscious of it. I did mention about the food establishments that are 10 or more having to now report their calories. You know, the idea was the government thought it would make people, you know, self-aware, and then they would start making healthier choices. Do you think it worked?
No.
Exactly. It didn't have the effect that the government thought. Yeah, I know it scared the hell out of me when I went to, when that first happened, there was a salad at Fridays that I would eat periodically, sometimes for lunch, sometimes for dinner, and it was a pecan crusted chicken salad. So I knew that, you know, I'm not, you know, I got, you know, I knew that the pecans would, you know, ramp up the calories on some level, but this thing was listed at like 1,800 calories. That's, you know, more than I eat a day. I was like, I went to Fridays that one day. I looked at the menu, I saw the calories listed, I shut the menu, and I didn't go back to Fridays for months because I was just blown away. But yeah, they're you know, like there's another one. It's so aside from Cheesecake Factory, there's another. It's an Asian-based restaurant, but the name always escapes me. And I think their entrees are even worse. I mean, it's just beyond, you know, what people can consume. I mean, even bread. I tell my clients, by the time you before you even get your meal, you have bread and you have butter on it, you're easily eating 500 calories between the bread and the butter. Especially if they have the measurable, you know, those gold wrapped slabs of butter. I mean, those are, I think, 100 calories per piece. And some people just take that whole thing and put it on a piece of bread. And yeah, scary. It's scary the amount of calories people consume. All right, so now we're on to chapter 20, weight management. And, you know, I don't think I need to tell you this. The prevalence of obesities in the United States is insane. I'll share, you know, I love stories because I really feel that it just brings real world application. Through this, the SUNY school system, we're able to bring this program to our students called COIL, Collaborative Online International Learning. So what I've done with professors both in South Africa, a university called Durban University, and Venezuela, IESA was the university there. We connected my students with the students from that country, and they worked on a project together. So the opening, just, you know, kind of like the icebreaker was always, you know, list foods. So Venezuela, for example, list foods that you think is typical of an American breakfast, lunch, or dinner. And then my students were asked to do the same thing for the Venezuelans. And I just remember the pictures, like, you know, when you go for breakfast, like at an IHOP, right? You get pancakes this high, you get eggs, you get all of these like things on one plate. and then sandwiches, that are this long, that people are eating for lunch. And so, but I just remember my students, I said, so what do you guys think about, Venezuela's interpretation of what the Americans eat? This one kid, he puts his head down, he goes, painfully true. And I'll never forget that. But yeah, it was pretty sick. But this is why we have an obesity rate. When I was still living at home, just graduated high school, we used to host exchange students from Spain. And I remember this one kid, athlete, soccer player, did his senior year here. And he went home, I think, gaining at least 10 pounds. Loved White Castles. He ended up eating it multiple times a week when we first introduced him to it. But yeah, because now it's different. But back years ago, you didn't have the availability of fast foods the way we had it here in the United States, and then it just kind of exploded. But yeah, in the United States in particular, obesity is a huge problem. And if you just look at the years here, right, the years that were surveyed, if we look at like the purplish color is for men, the green is for women. We're talking about the obesity prevalence in percentages on the left, and at the bottom are the years that were surveyed. Just look at the difference from 1960, 62 to 2017, 20. I mean, it's insane. And it's just gone up, up and up and up and up. And the sad part about this is that it's affecting children too. So typically children that are raised, with parents who are obese will end up, with the same issues. And we're not just talking about, obesity. It's the impact that obesity has on the body and the risk now of developing disease. And there's a very strong correlation based on research, obesity and cardiovascular disease. Okay. Yeah, it's a major problem in this country. So let's go through what it actually, classifies somebody as obese. So characterized by excessive fat mass, causally linked to adverse health outcomes, labeled as a disease. Only in 2013, we're only talking about 11 years ago, was this labeled as a disease, obesity. Intended to, and basically it was intended to grease weight bias and stigma. That might have been, I'm just trying to think, that could have, although I think it might have happened even earlier than that, but that might have been around the time where they added the labels, when I put the calories on the, I mean, I could look it up, but I think it was even before that. So it's been quite some time now that they started with that in hopes that they could make some inroads for obesity. So let's define obesity. So it's a BMI, body mass index, often used even though it does not directly measure body fat, right? We said that. So anything in excess, if you test someone and their BMI is greater than 30 kilograms, that's considered obese. But they have it actually broken down as grade levels 1, 2, and 3. So 30.0 to 34.9, that's grade 1. 35 to 39.9 is 2. And anything over 40 or higher is considered extreme, and it's a grade 3. But what do we say about BMI?
It only takes into account, it does not take into account muscle, only.
Yeah, and if you, I think you guys might be doing that this week in the lab, but you're going to see those of you that, do have a lot of muscle mass, you'll do your BMI and it's going to throw it over. It's going to classify you as, I think, grade 3 obesity. So yeah, so it originally was the height and weight charts used by insurance companies, and now, I mean, it doesn't look like they made any, that they made any changes to that. They just called it something different. But I remember going in a few years back. It was probably 5 years ago, actually. I went into a doctor's office, and this woman, nurse walks in. She's doing my vitals, heart rate, blood pressure, and so on. And she had this card in her hand, and she asked me my height and my weight, and she's like, oh wow, she says, we generally don't have anybody that's right, within where they should be, in BMI. And I'm just laughing. I'm like, it really doesn't mean much, because just because someone's thin doesn't mean they're healthy, and just because someone, you know, is overweight doesn't mean they're unhealthy, right? So there's so many other factors that go into it, you know. Or in this case, if you're, you know, you're giving this person, you know, the information for that she can look up on a BMI chart, and you're very muscular, she's going to turn around and say, oh my God, you know, you're a grade 3. It's like, it's so ridiculous, right? So, you know, so just keep that in mind. It's just, again, based on research, they've used it, you know, they deem it to be an effective tool on some level. But, you know, the gold standard is really hydrostatic weighing and the DEXA scan. So, but we'll, if we haven't already spoken about that, we'll get into that. Actually, might be in this lecture. Okay, so continuing to define obesity. So if we're doing weight, waist circumference, and yeah, I'm sure it's coming up on the next few slides. So you're going to be doing this in, you probably, if you haven't already got it, next week, they'll probably, I think I showed it to you guys last week, you'll get a tape measure, and you'll be doing, you know, measurement of sites, and you're able to do what's called circumference measurements. So, but waist circumference is used as a screen for obesity. So we're looking at if a male has a circumference measurement at their waist of 40 or more, that is a sign of obesity. And then 35 inches for women or more is also considered obese. Okay, so when you're looking at, oh, let me just go back one. Okay, what we're talking about here, okay, is the causes of obesity. So, you know, what actually, based on research, what have they've seen that causes, you know, things that are linked to obesity. So genetics for sure, lifestyle for sure, and then the environmental factors. You know, where I know that the government is trying, you know, with this equity, diversity, and inclusion, they're trying to make, you know, everyone have access, just having nothing to do with money, right? So, you know, you'll find that if you drive through lower income neighborhoods, you're going to see way more fast food places than you're going to see healthy markets. Like, you're not going to see Whole Foods or, you know, markets like that where people can get fresh stuff, okay, produce and things like that. You know, because why? Because it's cheaper. You know, it's easier to go to. The one thing that comes to mind right now, there's this gas station I go to, and every time, once you know, I go in, I give the guy the money, I tell him how much I'm going to use to fill up. Soon as I click which you know, type of gas I want, and I remove the nozzle, whole commercial for Burger King, because there's a Burger King inside. And I'm telling you, it's I'm sitting there watching it, and it's on like a repetitive thing for the time that I'm filling, and then once I'm done, it stops. The video stops. But it's two junior burgers or Whoppers, whatever the heck it is, for like $5, you know. And I'm looking at it, and it tells you it has cheese, it has, you know, bacon and all of this stuff. And it's so funny because one day I was like, wow, this really sounds good. But I know I would be sick as a dog because I can't even tell you the last time I ate fast food. But, you know, all of this stuff will play into, you know, increasing one's risk for obesity. All right, so obesity is a complex multi-factor disease with many factors contributing to its development. Positive caloric balance leads to increased body weight, right? So, you know, it's you know, calories in, calories out, right? So if you consume more calories than are going out, you're going to gain. If they're balanced, you'll stay the same. If calories out are more than calories in, you're going to lose, and it's that simple. Okay, so genetics, so monogenetic and polygenetic, inheritance responsible for 40 to 70% of the inter-individual variations in obesity. That's crazy. That's a huge number. So basically, right there, it's like, you know, a person really doesn't have, you know, if this is something that they have, you know, genetically, you know, they're already, you know, their chances are, you know, it probably looks like a mountain to them, that, you know, whether they're going to be able to conquer this based on these percentages. Approximately 25% variance in percentage of body fat attributes to genetics even with genetic predisposition, great capacity on the part of the individual to affect body weight and fat. Oh yeah, there was actually a study that they did with twins. It's on, I think it's on Netflix. And they did a study where twins, born and raised in the same household, and then, how they were affected. So I didn't watch this one. I know people that have. There was another one I watched about the gut, which was really interesting too. So, but yeah, I'm pretty sure it's on Netflix. Anybody watch it? The twin study?
I haven't heard of it.
Okay. Yeah, I'm pretty sure it's currently on.
I watched a little bit of it.
Okay. Am I correct? Is it
I
on
haven't seen it.
Netflix? Okay.
I don't know.
Okay.
I'm an identical twin, so and it's really interesting because I've done athletics my whole life, and my twin has never done any athletics. So we have different body types. It's really interesting, actually.
So let me ask you a question. If your twin did exactly what you do you think that you guys would look, very similar in terms of body type?
Yeah, I believe we would, because I'm shorter than her. And she's like 2 inches taller than me, or more,
Okay.
something like that. And like I had curly hair for some reason, and she always had straight. So, and we're identical. Like they tested it right when we were born. But
Right.
yeah, so it's just
Interesting. I find that so.
and our bodies just look different. Like now,
Wow.
yeah. So just
Interesting. I find it so
comment.
interesting. Yeah. Wow. Okay, so lifestyle and environment. Energy intake increases over time. Energy expenditure, okay, this includes basal metabolic rate, thermal effect of food, so that's the the breakdown of food, metabolizing the food, and physical activity. Decrease in occupational energy expenditure, relationship between low levels of physical activity and increased likelihood of weight gain and the development of obesity. What comes to mind as I'm looking at all this, right? The pandemic, right? We were talked about this. I don't know if it was first lecture or second, but I think we were probably more affected than most because of our I'm just going to say need for exercise, right? We're kind of dependent on it. We, because we enjoy it and we believe in it and all of those things, but then when we, especially if you belong to a gym and suddenly you weren't able to go for a couple of months, that really had an impact. And so I find that, that some of that has not worn off for some people. And more so probably because this whole work at home concept now, because what happened was it was a necessity at first, right? But now companies realize the value of it in terms of reducing their overhead and just paying people to stay home and do the work from home. They don't have to have, office space and things like that. So I think, what happened is that we, because of the pandemic, we ended up, with a society of people who now became inactive, and a lot of people haven't just, they haven't snapped out of it yet. Have you guys found that in your experiences?
Yeah, I know people that have gained weight for that time.
Yeah, and they just haven't recovered from, to their pre-COVID, bodies. And I think I think it's a psychological thing. I think there's a lot of factors that are contributing to that. But yeah, and myself included, because I used to go, I belonged to a gym at that time, and I used a cage. I don't know if I shared with you that I follow what's called the Starting Strength program, which is Mark Ripto. You can look this up. He's got a website, but I was involved in a research program. So it's deadlift, overhead press, chest press, and squat. And last summer, I moved out to a place where now I have a garage, so I bought a cage to put into my garage. And I'm this close to being back to the weight that I was lifting before COVID. And what are we talking, 4 years now? But it took me, I wasn't so keen on going back to the gym. And then even when I went back to the gym, I wasn't really committed the way I used to be, before COVID, but now I'm on a mission. And yeah, so, it's been over 4 years, which is crazy. But it's, that's the one thing that comes to mind in terms of occupational, hazards from, that also linked to, people at risk for obesity. Okay, weight loss goals. So you may or may not know this, but I know this is something that's been, they've been saying this for as long as I've been in the field. The target weight loss is 1 to 2 pounds a week. Why do they say that? As opposed to, let's pick a number, 3 to 4 pounds, 5 to 6 pounds. Why 1 to 2?
It's just safer.
It's
That can
safe.
hurt, yeah.
So say that again. I'm sorry, say that
That
again.
can, as I was a wrestler too, and losing like multiple pounds like per day, it's going to dehydrate you. It's going to do a bunch of bad things to you. Yeah.
Right.
There are toxins in when you lose fat, toxins are released into your blood.
Right.
That holds
Okay,
toxins.
so yeah, so what you all are saying, that it's definitely much safer, but it's also doable, right? Because I think we talked about, what it takes to lose a pound. How many calories do you have to expend?
3,500.
Yeah, so we're talking about 1 to 2 pounds. We're talking about, 35 to 7,000 calories in deficit per week, right? So anything more of that than that, would take a lot. But also many people who do these quick weight loss programs, they end up gaining it back, okay? Because it's not realistic, all right? So this is definitely doable. And then for all the reasons why you said, yes, it's much safer to deal, to just focus on 1 to 2 pounds. General guideline recommendations, calorie deficits is what I was just talking about. That's the 35 to 7 because it's the 1 to 2 pounds. Note, energy expenditure is a dynamic process. I just talked about this. 3,500 calories, 1 pound is an estimated rather than a rule. Okay, so it's estimated. Okay, weight loss as it relates to physical activity. I think I gave you guys, well, we just talked about 1 pound being 3,500 calories. So if someone was on, I think I talked about this, right? Treadmill burning 500 calories in an hour. How many hours does that person have to stay on the treadmill?
7.
7, right? So what I think is that if that's always the example I give if someone's challenging me on that. But I will say that if you do get somebody exercising, then they're going to be more cognizant all around, right? So they're probably going to make healthier choices and so on when they do eat. So, but standard testing modes and protocols, individualized based fitness, ambulatory capacity, and current physical activity. So important to have a comfortable and safe environment. All right. So you have to consider all of that, which you should have learned last week when you in the lab, where you do all this, pre-exercise testing, and then kind of, get a baseline. Where is this person right now? And now you can safely, program them. And then you have to consider the person too. I think as when you start off in this field, you get so caught up in all of the literature and, all the things you're learning that you forget that you're actually working with a real person. So you really have to, listen and look and, take what you've written on paper and you figured out, but then you got to look at the person, and see, is this doable for them? You may still have to make further adjustments based on, the communication that you have with them. So you always have to consider them as well. Dose response relationship with increasing levels of physical activity resulting in greater weight loss. So I think, obviously what they're saying here is that, the more intense the activity is, the more calories you're going to expend. But for the example I gave you for the treadmill, I think if somebody's going to commit themselves to exercise long term, and we'll get into talking about, where people are, based on theories. But you know, I think it's the whole package. I think that once they commit to exercise and now they start to see how they feel, and then they want to add the exercise, the diet into it, and so on and so forth. I think, you know, it's kind of, they go hand in hand. But exercise by itself, it's just, it's very time consuming, and in terms of the amount of calories you're going to burn and the intensity level that you'd have to work. So it's about the calories in, calories out through the mouth. Okay, so physical activity continue with weight loss. So general relationship between physical activity and weight loss. So again, this is all based on research, but we've seen these numbers before, ACSM. So anything greater than 150 minutes per week. There's a modest weight loss of 2 to 3 kilograms. Physical activity now that exceeds 225 to 420 minutes per week. Now those numbers, you know, more than double. And then resistance training is also important. You know, obviously, if it can increase lean mass, that's going to help also with weight loss. And that's true. I believe that. I believe 100%. Okay. Okay, so National Weight Control Registry. This source provides information on the habits of adults who successfully lose weight and maintain weight loss. So over 80% used exercise. So basically what they collected in this registry based on research, you know, I don't know enough about this research that they did, but you probably could look this up, you know, in terms of, you know, what the population was, how many people they studied and so on. But what they found was that out of all the people, all the subjects that were involved in the research, more than 85% of them worked out. A common approach involved a diet low in total calories and low fat. Weight was monitored frequently, meaning they were on a scale or however they weighed these people. I'm sure they must have had some sort of way they monitored weight loss, whether it was, you know, calipers or the DEXA or hydrostatic weighing. You know, they might have had some method. Most exercise about 1 hour per day, and it says here 80% of them walked as their form of exercise. Okay, so that's pretty positive stuff. But, you know, again, you see, it wasn't just exercise alone, right? You know, there was there was involvement that was coming from the calorie intake as well. Okay, dietary aspects. So helpful to know the number of calories needed to sustain current body weight, estimate daily caloric need. So there is, you know, we burn calories for just to sustain ourselves, you know, sitting at rest. That's the resting metabolic rate. Thermic effect of food. So whenever, you know, we eat food, it goes through the digestive process. Their you know, calories ramp up for that. And then just energy expenditure for any activities we do throughout our day. Okay, even sleeping, you burn a certain amount of calories. Okay, so you know, all of that, if you know, if you can, rather than just going based on that 2,000 calorie, which I'm sure that's where the RDA got that number from. There's probably, you know, hundreds, thousands of people that they tested, you know, to find out what how many calories their body burns, just what, you know, with these daily caloric needs. And that's probably how they came up with that 2,000 calorie a day for the average person. But again, you know, I think that for most people that's high. Okay, so this kind of just in graph form shows you, so the resting metabolic rate accounts for 60 to 70%. The thermic effect of food is 10%, and then any activity is 20 to 30%. Calculating daily energy needs. So there are formulas that exist to estimate caloric needs. You probably need to take into account, you know, maybe gender, age. So if you are going to, you know, look at, you know, do some research on the internet to get, you know, a formula that might work for you, just make sure you have it for the right population. Equations are based on the following factors. So resting metabolic rate, proportional to body size. We know that the resting metabolic rate decreases with age. Muscle is more metabolically active than fat, but additional equations exist when fat-free mass is known. So that's what this equation is at the bottom. So the question here, so the one that formula, they're saying if you know that person's fat-free mass, you could use this equation. But like I said, you'd have to look up, if you do intend to use one of these equations, make sure it's suitable for the population that you're working with and that you have all of the information that's required. So in this particular equation, the question is, why is sex unimportant in an equation such as this?
Women tend to have more body fat than men.
So there are formulas out there that that would account for that, but in this specific formula, do you want to take a guess as why that wouldn't matter? Sex wouldn't be. Sex is unimportant in this case. All right, if you can see my notes, it's right there. So the reason for this particular formula is because they made an adjustment based on gender. Okay, so that's why this particular formula could work for everyone if you wanted to, but you'd have to still know fat-free mass. Okay, does that make sense?
How do you figure fat-free mass? Is that another equation, or is that based on body fat composition?
Yeah, that would be another equation. Okay. All right. Any questions about this? All right. So, you know, and formulas of all kind, you know, they'll do this sometimes. They'll make adjustments based on, you know, certain things so that it's, you know, a formula that can be used for everybody. But like I said before, you know, if you do some research and you want to use a formula such as this, just make sure that it's suitable for the population. And again, based, you know, my stories always have stories. Here on Long Island, there was a school that was called out. I don't know about how the school system works in Chicago, but here, well, I'm sure it works the same because it was a United States, it was a government program. President's Fitness, you know, where they do, they test the kids at the beginning of the school year. You guys,
Yeah,
okay.
they do. Yeah.
So yeah, because it's a United States wide. So so there was a school that decided for elementary school, they decided they were going to add body fat analysis using calipers. And the report that they sent home, all of the young kids were obese. Would we expect that in children?
No.
Yeah, actually we do, because they're still developing. Their muscle mass isn't anywhere near where it needs to be, right? So I mean, I'm not talking about looking at a kid and clearly, you know, the kid's overweight. We were saying all kids. The report came back that they were obese because their percentage of body fat at that age is expected to be way higher because they're still developing. They don't have the muscle development that they're going to have, you know, in their, you know, later teens, 20s, right? So that was a bad choice. So my you know, the reason why I mentioned that is that because, again, make sure whatever it is that you're using, I mean, even when you learned about all the testing last week, right, you have to make sure that you're using the correct protocol and the normative data for the population that you're testing. If you don't, then the results are not worth anything, okay? If you're not following the protocol as it's written and you don't have the normative data to compare the results of whomever you just tested, then your results are null and void, okay? So it's very important that you always use the correct, the correct formulas, protocol, and so on. All right, so that was that one. Okay. Okay, so dietary changes. You want to focus on healthy patterns, right? I don't think I have to elaborate on that. Core foods to eat, so all types of vegetables, fruits, especially raw, grains, at least half of which are whole grains in particular. Dairy, if tolerated. We have people that, you know, can't digest dairy products. Protein foods, animal and plant-based sources, oils at appropriate caloric levels. So You know, again, you might have to consider, you know, the person's dietary needs, but this is basically what they've studied, that, you know, if you can get foods from all of the food groups, and, you know, they break it down even more in terms of the percentages or the serving size per, you know, that is going to make, you know, that's going to allow for a more healthy way of eating. All right, here we go back to the scope of practice again. This is basically what's in your range, okay, as a personal trainer. So fitness professionals are not registered dietitians, meaning they should not be providing medical nutrition therapy to clients. That's why it's helpful if you can align yourself with, and if you do align yourself with anybody in the medical profession, guys, please make sure that they're worthy of it, okay? Don't just pick somebody because they have, you know, the degree and, you know, whatever, the license or whatever it is. Make sure that you really believe in what, you know, they're selling, you know, what they're, you know, what they believe, okay? If you don't, then find somebody else, all right? Because, you know, I'm sure, you know, that there are good and bad out there, and you don't want to be, it's going to make you look bad if you're referring your clients to people that are not worthy of the level that you're at. Okay, so just make sure that you respect and believe in what, you know, that person believes in as well. Fitness professionals should only provide information based on established nutrition guidelines, and we talked about this earlier. You know, always go with the dietary guidelines for Americans 2020, 2025. I'm sure they're already in the process of researching it to release from, you know, 2025 to 2030. So that'll be out next year or the end of this year, maybe. But yeah, that's where you want to focus on. And like I said, make copies of it, or get a link and, you know, share that with your clients, and always go based on that. Go through it, make sure you understand it. And this way, if your clients have questions, you can always address them. Okay, so this is, now we're getting into, you know, pharmacy and surgical procedures for maintaining weight. What's the drug that you guys have heard of? I think we might have already talked about this, but what's the drug that you've heard of recently that's not intended for weight loss, but now they're finding that, you know, that's why people are taking it?
Ozempic.
Yep, exactly. So do you remember its original purpose?
Isn't it for diabetes?
Correct. Okay, and this is not uncommon. You know, there's a lot of drugs out there that, you know, they'll end up using for one thing. That's why they were approved to be, you know, sold by pharmaceutical companies. But then they find out after a period, I mean, they test all of this stuff, but sometimes the testing may not elicit the results until they're used for a longer period of time. So, you know, the problem with this, and I'm sure you heard this in the news, is that, you know, Ozempic was originally used for people with diabetes, and once people were seeing how much weight they could lose on it, which is, you know, is in my opinion, it's a good thing. If somebody's struggling, you know, with obesity, morbidly obese, where they're at risk for disease, or maybe already diagnosed with disease, if they can reduce their risk by taking a drug, yeah, I mean, that's good, but there still has to be education, right? Because if they do come off the drug, we know what's going to happen. But the sad part about this is that it caused you know, it decreased the supply, and those that needed it for diabetes couldn't get it for a period of time. So that's scary. You know, big pharma is, you know, is notorious for doing things like this. So, but basically, nutrient stimulated hormone therapy is has been an effective approach for weight loss. Bariatric surgery, you guys know what that is, right? So you've heard of
abdominal surgery.
Correct, right? Where they reduce the size of the stomach. You know, there's a number of procedures out there for that. You know, this is for extreme obesity. They, you know, typically, you know, try to work with the person first to see if they can, you know, lose weight on, you know, through some other intervention. And then as a last resort, you know, they'll go in and do, but again, not without, some effects on the other end, right? If the person doesn't follow what they need to eat, it's a whole lifestyle change at that point. So if they go back to their normal eating after they've had the surgery, they're going to get severely ill. Nothing's a cure-all. You really, again, when we talk about, theories, it's really, the person has to commit. They have to be ready for this. They have to understand that, it's not a cure-all, and that there's going to have to be a commitment on their part. All right, gaining weight. So you want to focus on accumulating fat-free mass. Add resistive training, right? That's definitely going to help increase fat-free mass, muscle mass will increase. Ensure there is no other underlying conditions causing weight loss or struggles with weight gain, okay? We are going to talk about eating disorders, so that could be some of the things that you're dealing with. And I dealt with this, it's interesting with, where I've been in this field since 17, 18 years old, and early on I did, a lot of the people that came to, I was doing exercise aerobic classes at that point, and a lot of them were younger people similar to me. And I remember working this, with this one woman. She would come to my class regularly, and I didn't know it at the time, but she was, under, severe calorie restriction. She ended up losing, she stopped menstruating, and, and then she started to share with me that she was dealing with all of these problems. And, eventually she was able to get everything, she was probably one of the lucky ones, because she realized the risks that, were associated to what she was doing, but not everybody's, that lucky. So, might be something that you may have to, again, you're not doctors, you're not diagnosing, but, you may have to notice when somebody's just, doing it way too much. So tips to increase weight over time. So increase the caloric intake anywhere between 200 and 1,000 calories per day. So you can do that either by increasing meal size, the number of meals you eat a day, or eating snacks between meals. Adding resistance training, because that will increase muscle mass. When training intensely, make sure to consume 1.5 grams of protein each day for each kilogram of body weight. We've already talked about protein, so I think you guys have a good understanding on that. All right, so we'll finish up with eating disorders. Anorexia nervosa. What do you guys know about that? Any experience with it? In school, people.
I heard about it. I think it's when you starve yourself to death because you don't think you have a good enough body ever, so you just keep starving yourself.
Right. So it tends to happen. It can happen at any time, but I think it's real common with, K through 12, the younger grades. It seems to be happening younger and younger because of, social media and what, people are supposed to look like. So, there are different ways that, young people will restrict calories, whether they do it through diet or they take laxatives or they take, all sorts of, now it might be a little bit harder to get, but, back when I was younger, you could get all of these diet drugs that were basically caffeine based, and that they would speed up, the metabolism and so on. And then that coupled with, decreasing your calorie intake, that's pretty much what people did when I was younger. But, yeah, this could be, a problem that you might see if you, even working with, you might have a client, you might have a parent that'll come to you and say, hey, my daughter, my son, whatever. But it's a big problem. It's, people who continue down this path, often they're hospitalized, often people will die as a result, because when you restrict calories, the body knows that it can't sustain itself, so it's going to get the calories some way, somehow. So it starts eating on itself, organs and things like that. So I know I did have a client that did, she did her thesis on anorexia or eating disorders, and she ended up going to a hospital. And she remembers this one particular patient, female, where she would sneak into the stairwells of the hospital and run up and down the stairs until she got caught. You know, I've seen, there was a client who I still have, but the word around town with other clients was that she ate licorice all day long. And one day I went to her house and I saw her pocketbook was on the table or whatever, and it's, sure enough, sticking out was licorice. And if you look at the calorie content on the licorice, it's so low. You know, but then, you know, you have the, you know, what's going on with her teeth and things like that. But yeah, so you might, you know, you might come across things like this, and you know, you should be aware, but again, have the resources to be able to refer them, you know, to the appropriate help that they need. But you know, if you start to see, if you're working, you know, and it tends to be, I think, more prevalent. I don't have the numbers statistically, but I would say it's probably more common in women than men. But I remember, I think it was Oprah Winfrey when she was on, there was a woman, I mean, clearly, I mean, she was skin and bones, but she said that she would measure her fatness based on whether she could put her fingers around her wrist and put her, if her fingers couldn't touch, she knew she'd gain some weight. And she was eating celery and, you know, just crazy stuff. So, but, you know, it's not, it's a whole psyche, like there's a whole, you know, what's going on, you know, mentally, you know, things may have happened in their life. They might, you know, this might be a result of some sort of trauma in their life. So yeah, I mean, I actually had a student, a college student that told me that her father would put her down. She would get dressed up and, you know, she thought she looked great, and she'd come down and her father would say, you know, oh, you look fat in that dress or something like that. And she had an eating disorder because of it. So, yeah, you never know until you walk in that person's shoes. Okay, bulimia, any knowledge of what that is?
The college roommate that was bulimic.
Okay, can
Would
you just
eat and throw up.
Yeah, exactly. And what happens with that, you know, with the acid from the stomach, often they have bad breath as a starting point, but it affects their teeth. It affects their esophagus because it burns, you know, from the stomach acids coming up. So yeah, it's just, you know, leads to even more severe things. But
yeah, I had a college teammate who died as a result of bulimia.
Yikes.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Yeah, I would say bulimia. I've heard that a lot about college students, special students who go away. Is that what you guys both went away to college?
Oh no, so yeah, I live in Chicago. I went to NIU, but she was from Georgia and she transferred to NIU, I think her junior year. And one of the problems that she had at the University of Georgia is her coach saying that she wasn't small enough.
Wow.
And it turned into a lot of things. She was an alcoholic. And that, you know, we would all hang out and then she would disappear and we all knew. And she passed. It was terrible.
Sorry to hear that. Wow. So here at the bottom it says diagnose criteria must have engaged in behavior at least once per week for 3 months. Yeah, I mean, 3 months, I feel like if somebody's, you know, doing this, it's probably not going to be, you know, it's going to be continual more than once a week. You know, and if someone's at, you know, in that behavior for 3 months, I mean, I feel like it's already started, you know, setting up a pattern. You know, but the only thing that you could do, you know, or we could do as personal trainers is, you know, recognize the behavior. Again, you can't diagnose, but, you know, maybe, you know, because you got to realize you're working with clients, they're going to begin to trust you and, you know, respect you. And so, you know, maybe not in so many words, but maybe you can start to open up that conversation if you see some of, you know, these patterns in terms of the potential of developing an eating disorder long term. Because often when people are diagnosed with any of these eating disorders, you know, part of the team is going to include, you know, a therapist, you know, psychologist or somebody that's going to work with them from a mental level. Okay, so binge eating disorder. So this is characterized by consuming large amounts of food in a short period of time, not associated with purging. Diagnosed, must engage in binge eating at least, again, once a week, 3 times a week, so for 3 months. So basically they're eating a lot of food, let's say on the weekend, they consume a lot of food, and then they don't do it for the rest of the week, and then the weekend comes again and they eat a lot of food, and they so that would be considered binge eating disorder.
What's the difference between that and purging?
So with the purging, they're actually, I think with the binge eating, they go back, they eat a lot and then they go back to normal. They eat a lot, they go back to normal. With purging, they're making up for the overconsumption of calories, and so then they have a deficit of calories. Okay, and they may then end up doing, throwing up or taking a laxative or something like that. Okay. Same thing with binge drinking. I'm sure you guys have heard of that, right? People who, overconsume alcohol, on a weekend or whatever, and then they don't drink for the rest of the week. And, I guess in their mind, they think that that's okay. Well, I don't drink on the weekends, but, it's not how long you do it for, it's the amount of alcohol you're consuming in that time. So it doesn't matter if you do it in 2 days or you do it over 7 days, right? It's the consumption of that quantity of alcohol. Okay, disordered eating, a subclinical condition of unhealthy eating patterns may lead to clinical eating disorders. Important for fitness professionals to be aware of signs of disordered eating. So an example of this might be you go out to eat with somebody and you see them pushing their food around, right, to make it look like they're eating. There was a client that I had, that male client, and he knew this one particular woman that I was working with very well, and she definitely had a disordered eating. His comment was he believed that all women have, like he just made a blanket, all women have eating disorders. So this particular woman that we were discussing, I remember one time she loved yogurt. She loved, the frozen yogurt. And she used to get the crunchy sprinkles on it. And then I forgot how she found out about the calorie content, but she just lost it, because every day she would go for lunch, have this, and she was super thin. Clearly had an eating disorder, but for her, she wasn't anorexic. She wasn't vomiting or doing any of that stuff. So we would probably classify her more in this eating, disordered eating. So she had yogurt every day, frozen yogurt for lunch, and she would let them put whatever the amount of crunchy sprinkles on it, and then somehow she found out what the calories were, and then from that point on, she would have them put the crunchy sprinkles in a separate container, and then that basically lasted her the week. She would only put so much on each day's yogurt. So it was very calculated, so I guess disordered eating, they're still controlling their calories, but they're not at the point where you may look at them and see that they might be underweight, but not the same way you would classify an anorexic, okay, if that makes sense. All right, guys, we are at the end of this lecture. I can't believe we're down 3 lectures. It's crazy. I feel like we just started. Does anyone have questions on this or anything that we've spoken about in the last 3 weeks? Anybody? Oh, that's a good sign.
That doesn't mean we know it all.
No, and I'm not expecting you to. And if you told me you did, I was very pleased at the feedback I got this tonight based on questions. So, I feel like you guys are doing the right thing. But yeah, no, it's overwhelming. I understand. I've been there. I know. It's a process, and like I keep saying to you, the only way that you're really going to learn this stuff is if you can apply it. If you don't apply it, and that means applying it now. Right? We talked about, we discussed a lot on nutrition. open your eyes and your ears now, look at nutrition labels, just try to absorb some of what we talked about tonight, but by applying it in the real world. Because if you don't do that, it's going to be much more difficult for you to learn this stuff.
Right.
Because this is what it's about. It's about learning it, not memorizing it. I know you all want to be certified personal trainers, and I want that for you too. But even if you pass the practical and the written exam, that doesn't make you a personal trainer after that's done. You still have a lot of work from an application standpoint. So do it now while you're learning it, and that's going to make it that much easier when you do pass the test and you want to start training people. So, the sooner you can apply this, the easier it's going to be to make that transition. And it's you'll continue to learn. I mean, I've been doing this for 42 years. 42 years.
Wow.
I'm going to be 60 in September, and I started right out of high school. And I went to college. The very college I teach at is where I started my education, and it's been a process. I just keep learning and learning and learning and learning and because there's always something to learn.
Right.
And the one thing you're going to have to do is CECs to maintain your certification, and that's when it really gets interesting, because now you can take courses, whether it's online or go to a conference or something and learn something that you'd like to add to your portfolio, special populations that you like to work with and so on. But it's a process. But I know I totally get it right now that it's extremely overwhelming. That feeling will never leave you. I still remember that feeling.
Right.
So,
Do you have any advice on?
Yeah. Sorry, I interrupted you.
No, it's okay. Go ahead.
Yeah, do you have any advice on like studying, like just from the book and standards, just like note cards, or like
well,
what
you
kind
do
of
have
like way?
access on Canvas. You have access to the site is escaping me.
Neil? I
Quizlet.
think it's called
Quizlet. Yeah.
Quizlet?
So
Okay.
those are very helpful. I would just go to the site and test yourself on that. Okay, they're flashcards. Okay, and then if you just go through them, because again, it's about the repetition, and the application of. So yeah, I would definitely, each going into lecture 4 now, but definitely make sure that you read the chapters, the upcoming chapters, because then at least that allows you to come into the lecture with some knowledge base rather than read, and then you could go back and read it again. That's okay. But there's a lot of great resources on Canvas, on the WIT site. So just, immerse yourself in all of it. I mean, you guys are paying good money to take this course, right? So, with the hopes that, you'll take the exam and pass, what is it, 2 weeks after all of this finishes? So, 2 weeks after. Yeah. So, yeah, I can't recommend one way. It's, because also it depends on what works for you and your style of learning. So some people aren't getting it from the textbook. If they read it, they're not absorbing it. So watching a video works better for them. So I would just, when you get the recordings, rewatch it. Okay. That's the best I could say, and then whatever your practical lab instructor is telling you to do, at the end of each lab, they're giving you homework to do. Again, they're asking you to go to your families, to your friends, when you do the forms on the first lab, right? Ask you to do a part Q on somebody, do the step test on somebody, things like that.
Okay.
All right, get comfortable. If you go to the gym, get comfortable, with correcting somebody, your friends or family. If you go to the gym, get comfortable touching, doing heart rate. That always seems to be a big thing, the comfort of grabbing someone's wrist, right, to take heart rate. So just the more that, and from the practical side, the more that you actually do the parts of the practical that you'll need to do for the test, it's going to come like second nature then.
Right.
Because you'll know it. You'll have comfort at executing the test. Okay.
Okay.
All right, guys, any other questions for me?
Can we get the replays of the lectures? Can you maybe say something to push that along?
Yeah, I'll ask you. I was under the intention, I thought that the impression that he sent them out after each lecture, like the next day, but I'll reach out and find out, why he hasn't sent them out. Absolutely. As soon as we get off, I'll send him an email.
Awesome, thanks.
All right, you're welcome. All right, any other questions, guys? All right, then happy studying, and guys next week for our 4th lecture.
Thank you.
All right, have a great night.
What chapter?
Yes.
What chapters are we reading?
Let me just hold on a second.
11, 13, 14, and 17.
Is that what it is?
Yeah, it says at the end of
Of the notes, right?
11. Yeah.
Okay.
11, 13, 14, and 17.
Yes. Okay. Thank you so much. All right. So yeah, and then go back and review the questions, the quiz questions. They're on the PowerPoint, remember. So starting at 2, at the beginning, right after the title slide, you have the quizzes for lecture 2. And then tonight's lecture, I'm sorry, the quizzes for lecture 1, and then tonight's lecture had 2, and so on as you look at those PowerPoints. Okay, 5 has it at the beginning and at the end because it's lecture 4 at the beginning and lecture 5 at the end.
Oh,
Okay?
Yep.
All right, everyone, have a great night, and I'll see you guys next week.
thank you.
All right, you guys are welcome. Take care.
Thank you.
Okay, you're welcome. Take care, guys. Bye-bye.